Welcome back to the Bill Brief, the podcast where we break down legislation, what it says, why it matters, and how it could shape our communities. I'm your host, DJ William, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at HR 7008, which is also known as the Stop Insider Trading Act. Okay, so this bill was sponsored by Representative Bryan Steil, and the really cool thing about it is it has actually passed the House, which is amazing. Okay, so before we start talking about the provisions, the implications, the counter arguments, all of that, let's just start by asking ourselves, what is this bill and why does it matter? Okay, so one of the biggest criticisms that people have of Congress is that, they're lawmakers who have access to so much information that the public just doesn't have access to. Members of Congress, they help write laws, they attend all these classified briefings, they meet with government officials. So because they're able to do all of these things, people worry that they could potentially use that information that they find out to make money in the stock market before everybody else knows what's even happening. Okay, so this bill, the goal of this bill at least, is to reduce that concern. It places new restrictions on how members of Congress and even some of their family members, which we're going to talk about if that's a good thing or a bad thing, can buy and sell stocks. So let's break it down. Okay, so we're going to be starting with the major provisions, starting with provision number 1. It bans members of Congress from buying individual stocks. Okay, so the absolute biggest provision is that members of Congress cannot purchase covered investments. So what does this mean? It means that individual stocks or even similar financial interest in public traded companies cannot be purchased by Congress at all. So the ban also applies to their spouses and their dependent children, which is crazy actually when we think about it. And okay, let's do a comparison because it's a little bit confusing when you're like, why are they not allowed to invest? Why? So an example of this could be like a basketball game. Okay, say if we have a referee and they are making a bet on which team is going to win. Okay, are they allowed to make a bet and be a referee at the same time? Probably not. Why? Because they're going to favor one team over the other. So if they bet, hey, like $100 that team A is going to win, then they might give team B unfair fouls. Or, they might favor team A in one way or another. Okay, I don't know if this example is making sense. I hope it is. But yeah, so it's the same thing when we look at Congress and the stock market, right? Congress has the power to influence what's going on in the stock market, right? So many ways, right? Whether that's through certain laws that they pass, whether that's through like gas-powered cars, electric cars, right? They can do anything. They have the power to create laws. They have the power to talk to government officials. So they know what's going to happen before anybody else does. So if they know that, this one company is going to be benefited from a law and they decide, hey, I'm going to go invest a bunch of money in this company, then they're going to make a lot of money. Why are they able to make all this money and not just a normal person in the public? Because they knew about it beforehand. So it's not necessarily fair, but also, right, this ban, it applies to members of their family, their spouses, their children, which is really interesting to me. And okay, we're going to talk about what I think, and then later on we'll say the counter arguments. So it makes sense, right? Because it's like no different than a congressman or a congresswoman investing and then, or just they tell their family member to do it. But what if their family member, and it's even their children too, which is crazy. What if their children invest for their own reasons or for their own company, or there's so many different reasons, right? And we're going to get to that in the counter argument. So that's the major provision of this bill. That's like what this bill does. Okay, so the second provision of this bill is that it also requires congresswomen, sorry, I always say that, I'm so sorry. Okay, it requires advance notice before selling stocks. So this is interesting because it doesn't only apply to buying stocks, it also applies to selling. So if a member of Congress, their spouse, their dependent child, if they want to sell a covered investment, then they have to publicly announce their intent to sell between 7 and 14 days before the sale. So, okay, I believe the notice has to be filed with the clerk of the House for representatives and then the Secretary of State for senators. And the notice also has to be published online so the public is able to see it. And if the person does not decide to sell, they withdraw it. So again, it makes sense that you need to notify between 7 and 14 days. This is like another example, right? Maybe your boss is talking about this stuffed animal company. Okay, and you have a stuffed animal that's worth... or you wanted to sell it for $10, but let's say there's a big problem with the company and your boss tells you that this stuffed animal company is going to sell for $2 and you still decide to sell your stuffed animal for $10. That is not fair. And you knew what your boss was going to say before you sold it. So that's where all of this comes into play, right? It's about knowing that these Congress people, they know more than the public does. And that's not a bad thing. It's really cool, right? They're able to create all these laws. They're able to make such a big impact. I mean, if you really think about it, like the reason we've been seeing so much change is because of Congress, because of all of these laws and some of these bills that we've actually discussed that are being passed or in the process of being passed. But they have more oversight, right? They know more. But again, you're thinking about this affects their family. This impacts their family too. Like, what if a family member... like someone, like say if like a kid is really, really into selling, and then all of a sudden one of their parents is a part of Congress. Now, is that just going to stop for them? Like, it doesn't seem super fair, but it does make sense because, their parent could influence them. It completely makes sense, but it is a little bit sad to think about, but I keep saying it makes sense, but yeah, it's reasonable. It's definitely reasonable. Okay. The third thing that this bill does is it defines what counts as a covered investment. Okay, so I learned a lot about investments and different types of investments through this reading this bill, which is super cool. But this bill, it mainly applies to like individual stocks, to securities that are like public traded companies, and even like similar financial interests or anything like that. But it doesn't apply to every investment possible. So there are some investments that are held exempt, one of which is wildly held mutual funds. And these are really interesting too, because instead of investing in just one company, you invest in a bunch of different companies, and whichever one is doing well is the one that more of your money goes to. So that's kind of like what a mutual fund is, and it's really cool. So I guess if it's a mutual fund, you're not investing in one company because this law is going to benefit that one company. But then again, we're going to talk about this in the counter arguments as well. It's like very tactical. It's very like it's very like but yeah, so super interesting that there's different types of investments that this bill applies to, and it's good that it doesn't apply to all of them, right? Too much restriction is absolutely crazy, but yeah. Okay, so the fourth and also one of the most interesting provisions is that it also creates penalties for violations. A big penalty. So if someone violates the law by buying a prohibited investment, right, and they're in Congress, then they have to sell the investment, and they not only do they have to sell the investment, but they also have to pay a big financial penalty. And okay, let's actually look at the penalty. I'm forgetting the numbers. The penalty is the greater of $2,000 or 10% of the transaction value, plus any profits that they earned from that investment during that specified period in which they invested. So crazy, right? And also, they can't use campaign funds. They can't use taxpayer-funded congressional allowances to pay these penalties. So they have to pay it out of their own pocket, which is, it makes sense, right? Because, you broke the rules, but seeing it in practice, honestly, no. Actually, this is a great bill. This is a great piece of legislation. It makes it fair, and it's definitely something that should be applied. Why are you getting to invest when you have more insight into how the stock market is influenced? That doesn't seem so fair. Again, we are going to talk about their family members, and it does make sense that they have to pay a fine. A little sad, but I think most of these bills involve a fine. I think when we discussed the COSA, the COSA Act, yeah. Oh, and the Screen Act, I think they have to pay fines as well, which is pretty upsetting. Okay. This fifth provision kind of makes up for all of that little sad stuff, right? It's also that it creates some family exceptions. So we're going to talk about this in the counter arguments as well, because there are people that agree with these family exceptions and people that don't. And I was also saying, right, what if somebody is really into selling stocks and then, their parent becomes part of Congress? Like, that doesn't seem fair. So let's look at this part, right? Not every transaction, every transaction, that's a specification, right, by spouse or a dependent child is prohibited. So exemptions apply when investments are made on behalf of another person, and also when they're received as part of employment compensation. So that's what I was saying, if they have a specified job. Yeah. So these exceptions, they recognize that family members, right? Family members, they have careers. They have financial responsibilities that are separate from their member of Congress. Even though, they're related to a member of Congress or they're part of a family with a member of Congress, they have their own life too. And that own life may involve investing in stocks or selling, and saying, hey, we're going to prohibit all of this is pretty extreme. So yeah, it definitely makes up with this, which is why I believe this bill passed House, because it's extremely reasonable. There's nothing that's you're like, whoa, that doesn't make sense at all. Like, what are we doing, right? It definitely makes sense. So yeah, this is a really straightforward, reasonable bill, which is great. Okay, so now let's talk about the positive implications, the positive effects of this bill. Number one, and I'm sure you didn't guess it, this isn't obvious at all, but it increases public trust. Many Americans, this was our intro, they worry that lawmakers could personally benefit from decisions that they make in Congress. And supporters of this legislation believe that, I made it a little louder, I'm gonna quiet it down. Okay, yeah, supporters believe that banning stock purchases help restore confidence that elected officials are working for the public and not their own investment portfolios, right? Like, when they're making a law, you don't want them to think like, okay, this might benefit if I'm investing in this certain company. No. We want them to think, hey, what is the law that I could write to benefit the public, to benefit the people of the United States, right? So that's what's really important. Okay, number two, it reduces conflicts of interest. And I love that phrase, conflicts of interest. I think I first learned it in English. I forgot what grade, but it's very interesting. Okay, so imagine Congress is voting on a law, and this law could significantly affect a technology company. If a member of Congress owns that stock, people may question whether their vote is based on what's best for the country or what's best for their own finances. And this bill is going to reduce those conflicts. And it's super cool. I actually got to see, not in person, but on a TV on Capitol Hill, actually, because they were voting. Sorry, I'm not being specific at all, but I was at the summit, and Congress was voting on a bill that had to do with UN funding. And I saw it on the screen. It was amazing. It was Democrats and Republicans, and it was this many yeses, this many nos, and it was super cool. But anyway, just thinking that someone could put no because they're influenced by something of their own instead of thinking about the public as a whole, is a little bit upsetting and sad, because as Congress, you're supposed to represent the people, especially, the people of your state, of course, but also of the country as a whole. But yeah, that was a great opportunity. That was super cool. That was amazing. Okay, third, Third, it improves transparency. Transparency. How does it improve transparency? Because it requires public notice before selling stocks, right? So not only does it improve trust, it also improves transparency. It helps the public not only trust you more, but also know. But also, transparency creates trust. Awesome. Yeah. If you're more transparent, people are more likely to trust you, which is exactly it in this case. But yeah, so they have to have notice, 7 to 14 days before selling stocks. And this just allows the public to know when both members and their families are going to plan some major financial transactions. And it just makes the government more transparent as a whole. Again, the two more, we can just go through this really briefly, right? It strengthens accountability because penalties make violating the law very costly. So members of Congress, they don't want to pay that fine, especially out of their own pocket. So they're gonna hold themselves accountable. They're gonna really work to make sure that they're following all the rules of this legislation, which is super important. And I think, I was complaining about the fine earlier, or not complaining. I was like, but fines make people want to follow a bill, want to follow the rules because, or not even fines, right? Just anything, just knowing. I think there was this one bill that we did that said, hey, like you could be sued from another company if you don't follow this legislation, right? So just having that, like, okay, if you don't follow this is going to happen. It definitely keeps you more accountable. It's great. It's like, hey, you don't study for a test, you're not going to do great. Or maybe some people do. But actually, no. You know what? Let's not say that. Everybody studies. But yeah. Or actually just in those movies where I'm not thinking of a movie right now, but like someone forgets to study and then they just do amazing on their test, or anyway, there are consequences, and bills putting those consequences in place, like written directly in the legislation, is super cool and really awesome and definitely needed. Okay, so let's quickly get into the counter arguments and then we will close for today. But okay, this counter argument is actually, like, when I read this, I was like, whoa, because I didn't even think of that, but it could discourage qualified candidates because people argue that, like there are very many successful professionals, very many business leaders who would be willing to run for Congress, but they might be less willing if doing so requires lots of restrictions on their personal investments. They might not really be into that. But also, like, I get where this is coming from, but also they know that, their life is going to be different if they serve on Congress. That's a crazy responsibility and incredible opportunity. And they are going to have more restrictions. And that's what comes with being a part of the job. And I know it's really sad, but also we saw in the provisions, right, there are exceptions. While it does apply to members of family, there are exceptions, right? If they have a career, it makes sense. So I feel like this bill is very, reliable and forgiving, and it just makes sense as a whole. It's really reasonable. So I don't completely agree that this should be a reason that the bill doesn't pass. Definitely not. But it's definitely something to mull over for sure. Okay, so I kept saying from the beginning, I was sitting at this, I was like, yeah, we are going to talk about the family restrictions during the counter arguments. But, okay, sorry. So we know that there is a provision that has exceptions. Even though there are these exceptions, people are still worried because it still applies to members of family, right? Even though there are exceptions. And critics say that, family members shouldn't just lose their financial freedom because a relative serves in Congress, which is completely understandable. But I feel like this bill is also understanding too. I mean, the way it's written is very sweet. It's like, we get that, there are other things in your life and it makes sense. And, if, if it's career related, another person, right, it makes sense. That's okay. That's an exception. So I feel like this counter argument is a little bit harsh because this bill is very lenient about that. I'm sure that there would be a huge process in making sure that if a family member were to invest, they have to state their career, why it's relevant, all of that. But again, they know this as a family, as a person going into Congress. They know that there are going to be certain things that they need to hold themselves more accountable on. There are going to be more restrictions just because, they're serving in such an important role. And this bill gives a lot of oversight on it. It lets them know exactly what to do and why. So I think it's great. So I don't think this should be a reason that the bill doesn't get passed. Okay. The last counter argument that we're going to talk about is enforcement and how enforcement could be complicated. So I agree. This is actually one that I'm like, okay, I agree, right? Because if you're monitoring thousands of financial transactions involving not only just the members of Congress, but also their families, right? Their spouses, their children, that would require a lot of oversight, a lot of enforcement. And critics are questioning, what rules would be consistently enforced, right? Are we going to have one rule for one member of the family and the rule is changed for another member of the family? Is it different for a kid and a spouse? How are we going to follow those same exact rules when we're dealing with thousands of transactions? And it makes sense. But I think the fact that this bill is written and that there is effort that's being taken toward increasing public trust, transparency, accountability, that shows that, there will be a solution. There will be something that is able to become crafted, right? And really, when you think about all the amazing effects, all those positive implications that we were talking about a couple minutes earlier, it's great. It's great, right? We've got so much. We increase public trust, which, there's nothing better than that, really. Especially increasing public trust in Congress is really amazing, truly. But yeah, so while that last counter argument did make sense, it's definitely not a reason that we do not pass this legislation. With all bills, right? It's okay. We experiment with something, but of course, like it is going to be more specific. There are going to be ways. They're not just this bill wouldn't be written if they didn't have a plan of how the transactions would be managed, right? So I'm sure it will be managed in the best and the best way. The best and most effective. Yeah, I kept trying to say the word effective. The best and most effective way possible. But yeah. So that closes for the counter arguments. I realize we've already hit 21 minutes, but this bill was great. We know that, it's going to do so much good. It really is it answers the question, should members of Congress be allowed to buy and trade individual stocks while making decisions that could affect those companies? And when we think about that question, it's such an important question. And this bill does such a good job at answering it. And not only does it do a good job at answering it, it creates debate, but the debate is about balancing ethical government. It's about balancing transparency and also balancing individual financial freedom, which is why it is such an effective piece of legislation. Okay, so that is going to be everything for today, but I will see you for the next Bill Brief episode. Bye!